Okay, so started talking about ancient humans. Then I moved on to ancient human civilizations. Then I started talking about the crossover in the religions from back in the day, hammering home the point that you need to be in touch with what happened in our early prehistory to understand our more recent past, our present, and our future. Then I started talking about sea level rise, and you might wonder what the fuck has all these things got to do with each other? Well, wait, there's more. So I'm going to talk briefly about Mesopotamia again. I never mentioned before. There's a couple of places within Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia was a word like Europe. Like there wasn't a king of Mesopotamia, no more than there was a king of Europe. Okay, it's a huge, big expanse. You may be familiar or semi-familiar with some of the cities within Mesopotamia. Sumer, if you've ever heard of the Sumerian text or the Sumerians, basically. Acadia or the Akkadian Empire, Babylon or the Babylonians, all those cities and peoples that I mentioned all resided within what we refer to as Mesopotamia. So what I'm going to talk about now is essentially an extension of sea level rise and decrease. Okay, so with a religious angle on it. So I'm not saying that sea level rise was the reason for flood myths worldwide, but I just think there's a lot of crossover and maybe there's something to it. Who fucking knows? Anyway, in Sumer, the Sumerian god instructs their king, Zusadra, to build a boat because he tells them there's a big flood coming. It's going to flood the world, and if you don't have a big boat for you and your fucking kids and the animals and the plants, you're going to drown with everybody else. So the god instructs the king to build a big boat, get out of the flood, and restart the world, basically. Okay? Same story is in the Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh. Same story is in the Babylonian epic of Atrahasis. Okay? So that's Mesopotamia boxed off then. Bearing in mind now that this predates Christianity by, I don't know, 2, 3, 4,000 years. The Indus River Valley civilization, nailed it, is the home of Hinduism. And in Hindu mythology, Vishnu, which was the top god, he appears to the first man. He actually appears as a fish, strangely enough, and warns him of a big flood, tells him to build a boat and save himself and restart the world. In Greece, Zeus does the exact same fucking thing, okay? He decides to end the world by making the rivers run in torrents, rising the sea level, and demolishing the world. Even the Chinese had it. The Great Flood of Gung Yu, it had to be fixed by creating drainage. And, who knows? Maybe that has nothing to do with the drainage required to grow rice and sustain populations. Maybe. I don't know. This is the fucking thing. All of this is a fucking mystery. But at least knowing about the mystery, you don't need to know the answers to the mystery. You don't have to solve the mystery. You just need to know that these things fucking exist and be somewhat aware of them. The Mayans on the other side of the world also had their own flood myths, but I haven't touched on the Mayans yet on that end of things, plainly because I don't know a whole pile about them, or not as much as I do about these guys, but I absolutely intend to get to them. Now, the fact that all these different regions, separated by thousands of miles, all had the same flood myths and all predate Christianity by thousands of years, okay? Before you ever heard of fucking Noah or an ark or any of that crack, these stories were ubiquitous across all human civilizations, or at least the overwhelming majority of them, and all that we're aware of as far as I'm aware. But anyway, when I first realized that all these ancient cultures had their flood myths, all these ancient cultures had messiahs that became teachers at 12, oh sorry, at, yeah, child teachers, traveled around with 12 friends, performing miracles, all that jazz, all that crossover. When I was a young guy, I just took that on board as being absolute proof that there was nothing to these stories. That there was nothing to Christianity for a start. I mean, Jesus Christ, what more proof do you want? This is supposed to be the earliest text that we have of these stories, yet there are other stories thousands and thousands of years older, which are literally the exact fucking same, and if not the exact fucking same, as near as makes no difference. But what I'm beginning to think now is, instead of it being proof that they're all bullshit, it's proof that there's something to them. Now, I'm absolutely not making the case for Christianity here, obviously, okay? But there is something to the flood myth. What it is now, I'm not particularly sure, but there's one thing that I particularly like, and it's more to do with building the boat than it is the flood. So the flood may represent shit going bad. The flood may represent your girlfriend breaking up with you. The flood may represent you losing your job. The flood may represent you getting fucking cancer or your kids becoming sick. The flood may represent shit going wrong, basically, okay? Your life falling apart in whatever form that happens to take, okay? Now, the more important point than the place that's going to be flooded is what you do so that you're okay, basically. And what you do is you build a boat or you build an ark. Now, that's your life, or at least could be viewed as though that's your life. So your life should be viewed as an ark. You should be working on your ark so when the flood does come, and it will come, okay, when the flood, which may be just bad news generally, when bad news comes a knocking, and it will, if you haven't been hit by some sort of a fucking travesty, your turn is coming, I can guarantee you of that. If you haven't had a serious death in your close family, a serious sickness, a serious incident like that knocks you on your fucking ass and levels you, if you haven't had that, brace yourself, because you will. Do you know how I can say that with such certainty? Because it fucking happens to everybody. So watch the fuck out and prepare your life. Have your life as such that it's not hinging on your job. It's not hinging on your misses. It's not hinged on any one thing. That you've got a good spread, that you've got good foundations, and that you don't just completely crumble when the inevitable flood / devastating thing occurs, which it will, guaranteed. But wait, Frano, I went to school the same as you and I didn't learn any of this. Well, guess what? I didn't learn any of this shit in school either. And when you think about it, if you didn't learn about any of these things, if you didn't realise that the Noah's Ark and that whole flood story was, if you didn't know that was thousands of years older than it is, and if you didn't know that all these old ancient civilizations, their leaders basically, or their equivalent Christ figures, had so much crossover. 12 disciples, born of a virgin, star in the east to mark their birth, performing miracles, 12 pals, baptized at age 30, child teacher, died, resurrected 3 days later. If you didn't hear that all these other civilizations had those exact same characters and yet predate the Christian stories by thousands of years. Okay, this isn't, it was kind of the same, and maybe the Mesopotamians robbed a little bit from the Christians, and maybe the Christians robbed a little bit from the fucking Indus and all the rest of it. No. Jesus Christ supposedly was born 2020 years ago, and all these civilizations that I'm talking about are literally thousands of years older. Okay, thousands of years older. Okay, so just to get that across. But why do you think you weren't taught this stuff in school? Ask yourself this. Was it a Christian school you were brought up in? Or a Catholic school? Or whatever? Like, what denomination of religion was it? I mean, I would imagine that if you grew up in India, you're going to learn about how Vishnu appeared and warned of a big flood. You're not going to learn anything about Noah. Why would you? And, the same can be said for if you grew up in any of these different places. Okay, now, why wouldn't they inform you about all these other things? Because it's devastating to their claims. For a start, okay, Christianity claims to have the one book, the Bible, the, quote, word of God. Not the word of one particular God thousands of years after other gods. The one and the only God. So why would they tell you about all these different things? It would make no sense. It's like me as a salesperson trying to sell you a pair of Nike runners, while also at the same time telling you that there's Adidas runners out there that are every bit as good, little bit cheaper, and maybe possibly better suited to you personally. It's not in their interest to do that. So why the fuck would they? They wouldn't. And that's why it's not taught in schools. Enough Christianity and religion bashing. I shall chat to you tomorrow. But before I let you go, I'd just like to remind everybody that this episode and all the episodes on YouTube have been brought to you by past guest and friend of the show, Pat McKeown. Pat is very similar to myself insofar as that he's long had an interest in the mind and more specifically the brain and how they both interact, to such an extent that he went and spent 4 years getting a degree in neuroscience and then spent a further year in getting a master's in psychology. Now what he's done is pretty fucking cool. He's after setting up his own YouTube channel. It's called Pat Psychology Masters and there's a link in the description. Now what he's done here is he's uploaded all the best bits that he's learned over the last 5 years and put them into short, plain English, easy to understand YouTube videos for the likes of myself. His YouTube channel has been a massive resource for me in understanding both my mind and the mind of others. So hit up Pat Psychology Masters YouTube channel, subscribe, give it a like and a comment and a share, all that kind of stuff helps, and I'll chat to you soon.